Welcome to Literary Latte, the podcast with a Southern accent on writing. I'm Linda Bouchard, and it's time for your jolt of literary inspiration. Let's face it, we need books now more than ever. Today, we're about a month into this corona pandemic, and we're all looking for an escape. Thus, books. My guest today is Southern novelist Kristy Woodson Harvey, who provides the perfect antidote to isolation with her new book titled Feels Like Falling. Kristy will talk about the experience of launching her book in the midst of a global health crisis and how thinking differently can make all the difference. But before Kristy joins me, I want to encourage writers that creativity can actually ramp up during a pandemic, and we have plenty of historical evidence to choose from. William Shakespeare produced some of his best work during the plague. After suddenly finding himself without a steady job and lots of free time, Shakespeare got to writing, and he composed King Lear, Macbeth, and Antony and Cleopatra before the year was out. And while the theaters were closed, he shifted gears and wrote some of his most successful poetry. His work was a narrative vaccine. The takeaway? Write while you wait. And my guest today, Kristy Woodson Harvey, is proof positive that anything can happen when you just keep writing. And we'll talk about all of that right after this from our sponsor. If you want to get your book to the next level and give voice to your written words, then creating an audiobook is the proven and powerful way to unlock a whole new audience. So don't wait another minute. To find out how you can bring your book to life with audio, visit audiobooksolution.com to schedule a free consultation with veteran producer David Wolf. He's worked with the best, and he'll work with you to create an audiobook you'll be proud of. Plus, David will get your audiobook distributed to Amazon, Audible, iTunes, and other online channels. Audiobooks speak for themselves. Go to audiobooksolution.com. Now let's get back to the show. I'm thrilled to welcome best-selling author Kristy Woodson Harvey, whose award-winning debut novel, titled Dear Carolina, launched her into the literary spotlight. She quickly became the Southern author to watch, with praise from Southern Living and Entertainment Weekly, among others. She's the author of 6 novels, and you may know her from her popular Peachtree Bluff series. Her new novel, Feels Like Falling, debuts April 28th. It's an odd couple story of friendship that asks how much our past choices define our happiness. And today, Kristy talks about the inspiration behind her new book, what surprised her most about becoming an author, and the challenge of promoting a book during a pandemic. Kristy, welcome in. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thank you, Linda. Thank you for having me. That was such a great introduction. And I love what you said about writing through the crisis, because it's a good time to write a book, right? I mean, I feel like there's so many people that I'll see at events, or they'll talk to me online and they'll say, "Oh, I want to write a book. If only I had time. If only I had time." And now's the time. Now's the chance.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And it gives writers and all creatives an opportunity to take a beat, to slow down, think about where they want to go, and be more creative and innovative.
Right. Exactly.
Right. So, wow, this is such a challenging time in the publishing industry. And your book is about to launch.
Yes.
And so talk about what it's been like for you, Kristy, in the midst of this coronavirus pandemic and the challenges you faced and maybe the changes you've had to make.
Well, it's been sort of funny. I mean, on the one hand, I'm used to working at home, so that has been um, normal for me in the way that I'm working at home, but abnormal for me in the way that I have an 8-year-old son who I'm homeschooling. And my husband is home and also working from home. And it's so funny. So we have this big dining room table and we're like all posted up there, which is, I don't know why we've done that, but we've joked and called it the situation room. Because we feel like everything's always changing and we're trying to figure stuff out. And so, we're there to answer Will's homework questions. And, I might be, recording something or writing something and my husband's on a call and it's so funny. So, I don't know why we're doing that. We could spread out, but we've just sort of set up camp there. So that's been a little bit different. I also usually go on like a 6-week book tour when the books come out. So that obviously will be very different. And I'm a little bit bummed just because, I love going out and seeing my readers. It's so fun for me. But in the scheme of this tragedy and this pandemic, that is a very, very small thing. And I have a great team. They have worked so hard, transforming what, they spent 9 months working on this big, beautiful book tour and have spent, a week sort of trying to transform so much of it into online events. But we're so fortunate that we're able to do that. And we live in a world now where we can do that. And I'm one of the lucky authors too, because my book is going to come out and a lot of people's books are not. So it's good.
Yes, exactly. And you are one of the lucky ones because I'm sure you're able to shift maybe to online events. And how is that working for you? Tell us specifically how that has changed from the more authentic engagement to the virtual engagement for you.
Yes. I am actually surprised at how connected you can feel when you're with people on a computer screen. It's really sort of shocking. Even just, having my own book club on Zoom or like chatting with author friends. But very specifically, one of the first things that happened, well, we obviously knew this was coming for longer than we could react to it because we knew this was coming. We knew the tour would likely be canceled, but we didn't know if we would have books. So we couldn't really start transforming any of these events until just a few days ago, because a few days ago we realized we are going to have books. The books are going to ship to the distributors and people will be able to buy them. Because obviously you don't want to have a book tour and no one can buy a book. That would not be... So we have this great book we're talking about, but you can't have it.
Yes, it always helps to have the book there. Yes.
But very specifically, one of the first things that happened, we are so lucky here, as you know, to have this incredible Southern Independent Booksellers Association. And they have been so supportive of me. And I'm so excited because Feels Like Falling was an Okra pick, which basically just means they pick a few books. The booksellers pick a few books that they're going to hand sell for the next season. And Feels Like Falling was one of those. And so as a part of that, they are actually going to host my virtual launch on April 28th. And there are dozens of bookstores involved in that. And I think we can have up to like maybe 1,000 attendees. So it will be a really great way to kind of pull in the independent bookstores. And then, of course, a lot of the independent bookstores where I was already scheduled are taking their events online as well. And this is really fun. We haven't actually announced this yet, but Mary Kay Andrews, Mary Alice Monroe, Kristen Harmel, Patty Callahan, Henry, and I are getting ready to start this really fun show called Friends in Fiction. And it's going to be on Wednesday nights at 7. So we're going to start doing that next week.
And that is such a marvelous event. And wow, it's great writers. Yes.
It's going to be so fun.
Where can people find that? Friends in Fiction.
So we are taping our first episode on April 15th. And the first place that we're going to host it, it's going to actually be on Mary Kay Andrews' Facebook fan page. So we're going to start there, hosting it there. I think we might continue that, but we aren't positive. We just decided we're just going to jump in and we're going to see what happens. And then we'll all be sharing it on our Facebook and Instagram pages via recording. So people can come live or they can hear it after the fact.
That is a marvelous idea.
Yeah.
And it just shows how creative we can get when we're faced with a challenge and just thinking outside the book, as I like to put it.
Outside the book. I love it. Well, and honestly, I feel like this works so well because this is what I like to write about. I love to write about women who sort of have their back up against the wall. they don't have a ton of really great choices, but they figure it out. And I think that's what we're all doing. I mean, our publishers are doing it. We're doing it. I'm sure, I mean, I know you're doing it with, your authors, and we're just, what do we do and how do we make this work? And I'm so lucky to just have so many great relationships with bloggers and bookstagrammers and people who have always really had my back, but are just really coming alongside me and helping with this project. So it's going to be a great launch. I have every
Yes,
reason to believe.
wonderful. Yes, exactly. And, I think this shows people too, Kristy, how it is also collaborative. We think of the author as being so isolated, and oftentimes you are. I mean, let's face it, I think authors invented social distancing.
We totally
but,
did. We're like,
but
what do you mean? This is our life. What are you talking about?
but it is all very collaborative, and the publishers to the booksellers to your fans, and this pandemic has sort of shown a spotlight on how all of that comes together and all of it is affected.
Absolutely. There have been so many authors that have kind of come out of the woodwork. People are just helping each other. They're helping each other with launches. They're putting together initiatives that, help all of us, because we really are. It does become this point where we're all in this together. And I have felt so supported, really from the beginning, by other authors, which was a big surprise to me because, you are in a space where there's only room for so many of you. But people really have just been incredibly supportive. I've made such good friends through this. I'm a member of this incredible writing group called the Tall Poppy Writers. There are almost 40 of us female authors we basically exist to give back to our communities and to help each other. So it's really nice, especially in a time like this, because we can all get together and say, okay, what did you do that worked? What did you do that didn't work? What should we do? How can we do it together? How can we bring in our local bookstores? Because as a group, we are very worried about our independent bookstores getting through this time. But, I give them so much credit. I talked to several bookstore owners yesterday. They have such a good attitude. They have changed the way that they're doing things. People are, driving up to the curb to get books. A lot of people are doing deliveries to homes. I mean, they are really they're really stepping up and thinking outside the box. And I think it's really going to be to all of our benefit in the end.
That's a great way to put it. Love that. So let's talk a little bit about the book, Feels Like
Yes.
Falling, and
Okay.
talk about the inspiration behind it, Kristy.
Okay. Well, I'm one of those authors who I have no idea what's happening when I sit down to write the book. I don't know what the book's about. I don't know who the characters are. Some little thing will spark a story for me, and that's where it begins. And so for Feels Like Falling, it actually started in kind of a funny way. So my son was probably 3. And so my husband and my son and I were packing up to go to my hometown of Salisbury for Christmas. And so you can imagine the car just like absolutely packed to the gills. You could barely see out the window. We are the Clampetts, or I guess the Griswolds, since it was Christmas. But we are, packed to the gills. Everyone's a little ornery because we've been packing the car all morning and we have a 5-hour drive ahead of us. And so I am on my cell phone making photo books like online that I'm going to pick up at the drugstore on the way out of town and give to people for Christmas. So I go in the drugstore, and this is like maybe 20 minutes later. It takes about 20 minutes to get there. I go in the drugstore, and the woman behind the counter says, well, I can't give you your photo books because there are some professional photos in there. And I'm like, I have done this 10,000 times. She's like, I know, but it's a new policy. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, ma'am, please, like, it is Christmas. I promise I have the release. I promise I will bring it back to you when I get back. But I have a cranky 3-year-old in the car who needs a nap. My husband is going to kill me if I say, we got to drive 20 minutes back home and then 20 minutes back to the drugstore and then 5 hours. And so she's like, well, okay, we're kind of grandfathering the policy in. So I'll give you the books. And if you can just bring me the release later, great. So I go home for Christmas. Everyone gets their beautiful photo books. It is as though I have worked on them for months, not for 20 minutes in the car on the way. And I get the photo release. I take it back. They put it on file. No harm, no foul. But I'm walking out of the drugstore that day, and I thought, I was only thinking about my side of the story when I was asking her to do this for me. I was just thinking, I need my books. I got to get home for Christmas. What if she had gotten fired because she didn't get that photo release? And so the story kind of started for me there. I came up with the thought of these two women who meet in this sort of unusual way. And, what if one inadvertently got the other one fired and she knew it? And then, how did she respond to that? And so that was sort of the impetus for this story, and is sort of the beginning of Feels Like Falling, is Gray, who could really use a little good karma, getting Diana, who could really use a little good luck, fired from her job. So it was kind of a fun way to thrust these two women from very different worlds together and put them on sort of a shared journey.
Right. And talk about the setting for the book, and if there was anything that made it different from your other ones.
Yeah, absolutely. So this book is set in a fictional town called Cape Carolina. It is, set in North Carolina, and the town resembles Morehead City, North Carolina, quite a bit, I live in Beaufort, which is Morehead City's right over the bridge. And if you've read the Peachtree Bluff series, Peachtree Bluff was based on Beaufort, where I live. And so Cape Carolina is based on Morehead City. And after I had written Peachtree Bluff and realized how fun it was to get to make up a location, I thought, forget setting this in Morehead City. I'm going to set this in a fictional town. And it's so convenient because you can pull in the elements that you love of this real place, but then also, if you need a grocery store right there, it can be there. Or if the dock needs to be a little bit closer or a little bit farther away, that's fine. You can make that happen. So it was really fun to kind of get to create that little world that Gray and Diana live in, and that they live in a very different way, as readers will see.
Right. So, I'm always interested, Kristy, in the origins of a writer's life, because before you were a writer, you were someone else. So, what started you on your path to becoming a writer?
Well, that's actually kind of a funny story because I always liked to write. I mean, I always had little notebooks and I would write little stories, but I just, even as much as I read, and I just don't know that being an author was something that I ever considered. Like, that just didn't seem like a real job, I guess. Like, I just, when you're growing up, like, you're a doctor, or a teacher, or a lawyer, whatever it is. But, I didn't know any writers. And so that just wasn't something I ever thought of. I also really enjoyed science in school. And so I always honestly thought I would be a doctor. So my senior year of high school, that was kind of my plan. I knew I was going to go to UNC Chapel Hill, and I was planning on majoring in biology. And I got an internship at my little local newspaper, the Salisbury Post, which is an amazing, wonderful newspaper that I appreciate so much, and appreciated even more when I got to college. And all my professors were like, "This is such a great newspaper. You didn't even know this great place you were working for." But I went in on the first day and I had this little internship. And a photographer came and grabbed me and said, "Intern, I need you to come with me. We're going to write a story." And I was like, "About what?" And he said, "We're going to go cover a giant squash that looks like Elvis Presley." And I was like, "Oh, that sounds like such an interesting story." So we went out and we covered the Elvis squash, and it was funny. And then I ended up getting assigned this garden games series that entire year. And I wrote about all these crazy things like 12-foot tall sunflowers and a jar of pickled asparagus that had a film on it that looked like Jesus's face, and just some really exciting things. But I learned really quickly that I was getting to tell these real people's stories. I was writing about their lives, and I didn't really know then that everybody had a story to tell. And that was such a lesson for me that it really ended up changing my life. So I went home and told my parents that I was going to major in journalism instead of biology. And my mom said, "Well, that sounds like a great idea." And my dad said, "Have you lost your mind?" And that was a good question because newspapers were shutting down and magazines were closing. But I went to journalism school. I absolutely loved it. I ended up getting a master's in multicultural and transnational literature, which, as you can imagine, Dad thought that was just the fast track to a real job right there, because that's a practical degree if ever there was one. But when I graduated, I actually ended up moving to a little Eastern North Carolina town with my husband and working in finance, of all the random things that I could have chosen. But I look back and think that was such a good growing experience for me. It put me out of my comfort zone in a big way. And I think if you're going to be a writer, you can't be in your comfort zone, because there's a lot of rejection. There's a lot of putting yourself out there. There's a lot of people not liking you. And, I mean, there are people who
Mhm.
love you and it's like so gratifying, but there are also some people who
Mhm.
don't like you. And so you have to kind of have a little thicker skin. And so
Mm.
I think being in a more corporate world kind of helped me on that path, and being in sales and all of those things. But it was around that time that I started writing, and I wrote several manuscripts before I did anything with them. And I finally decided to submit one, and I signed with a literary agent. And then he was trying to sell a different manuscript, and I finished Dear Carolina. And it won a writing contest, and an editor at Penguin Random House was one of the final round judges, and she ended up buying the book out of the contest. So that's kind of how I got my start,
Mm.
in a
Mhm.
roundabout, long story sort of way. But I love it, and I'm so grateful. And it really felt like magic when it happened. And I thought, this is where I'm supposed to be. So I'm still here. I can't believe it.
Right. Well, that is such a wonderful testimony and a wonderful example to beginning writers, is to follow that passion, follow your dream. And it is about overcoming. And like you said, not everyone does like it. You have to have thick skin and be vulnerable.
And even if you have this huge successful book that ends up, selling millions of copies, it doesn't matter who you are. You had plenty of agents telling you no at the beginning, and probably a whole host of editors at publishing houses as well, just because, you know, everybody doesn't like the same thing and everybody doesn't see potential in the same thing. So, um,
Right.
it can be a hard road, but it's very gratifying also.
Absolutely. And, I have worked with some, heads of corporations, CEOs who have become
Sure.
authors,
Sure.
and they have been in tears
Yeah.
when a book signing didn't go well,
Yeah.
when, people didn't respond the way they thought, because you're used to living, surrounded by people that just, always say yes.
Worship it.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
So, I mean, it is
Yeah.
so fascinating to me that, that barrier is just crashed once you put something on the page and like put it out there and say, read this. The reaction is not always what you expect.
It's not. And I think a lot of being in any sort of creative profession, or I guess any profession at all, is really being able to like put your ego to the side, which is so hard, because like your ego is what like drives you. I mean, that's what, it's funny because it's sort of like your ego gets you where you are, but then you have to let it go, because, you're right. Like you can go to book signings and you can have hundreds of people there and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm a star. And then the next day you get there and there are two people and you're like, oh my gosh, like this is terrible. And if you really let that kind of like soak in, you would quit. I mean, you really would, because it can be hard. But it happens to everybody. And I think that's another thing, that having these friends that have been in this industry for so long, have really helped me see. I mean, they'll be like, I've written 25 books and been on the New York Times bestseller list every minute for the last 10 years. And I still have signings where 5 people are there. So, I just think it's one of those things, and you just have to get used to it.
Right. Keep the goal in mind, keep that, keep the horizon in front of you. And yes, you just have to press on. And
Yeah.
you are a perfect example of doing that and succeeding at it. So, we have a lot of new writers, emerging writers out there writing books now. And so, what advice, in closing, Kristy, would you know, books are about to debut even and events are being canceled. So the personal disappointment can feel really profound right
Yeah.
now for writers. So what advice do you have for those who may be discouraged and as a result of this coronavirus that happened, how can they turn that to their advantage?
Well, I think it's about being creative, which is what we do to begin with. But I also think it's about just really stopping and appreciating the things that are going well. And realizing that, this might not be a time that we're all on the road having these glamorous events, but it is a time where we can spend a lot of time, Skyping with book clubs. Like I've been doing that almost every night because normally I don't have time to do that. So I think it's just really looking for the opportunities and also just writing the next book. I mean, I think always working on the next book. I think the writing is what kind of grounds us and what keeps us involved in what we're doing. The promoting is, of course, so important. It's a vital part of what we do, but it's not the most important part. The most important thing is our writing and our books and the quality of them. And the stories that are going to come out of this, I think, are going to be really amazing. And I think for me, that's really helped me to just feel a sense of normalcy during this time. I actually have a book due tomorrow. So there was no time to be like, this is terrible. And what are we going to do? I just was like, well, it is what it is. We're just going to keep going because I'm on deadline. So everyone, we're just going to press on. But I do think that in some ways, slowing down to take care of yourself is really important. But it's also a time where we can put more into our writing than we might have been otherwise. And I think that those connections and those relationships are important now more than they ever have been, because we have to really rely on each other to, spread the word and to look for that support.
Well said. And Kristy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
My guest has been Kristy Woodson Harvey. Her novel, Feel Like Falling, is published by Gallery Books, a division of Simon & Schuster, and is available at your favorite bookseller and also online. And you'll find a link to Kristy's website in the show notes where you can find out more about her work and follow her book tour. She'll be heading out on a national book tour here, so you can follow those dates online as well. And Kristy, thank you so much. It's just been a pleasure.
Thank you, Linda.
Good luck with the tour.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and stay safe and well.
You've been listening to Literary Latte with Linda Bouchard. For more information, visit bookingauthorsinc.com.